Gospel artist. Kirk Franklin did something unexpected during a crowded live engagement. The whole crowd was stunned when he got up and faced Bishop N. Jones head-on. According to witnesses, there was such a strong sense of tension in the room. However, what was said that evening? Furthermore, why did Kirk Franklin pick that particular time to criticize one of the most well-known bishops in the church? The truth behind this heated clash is more deeper than anyone thinks, so stay tuned. Bishop Noel Jones and Kirk Franklin are two well-known figures in the gospel music and ministry industries. Bishop N. Jones, one of the most eloquent and contentious preachers of our time, and Kirk Franklin, the award-winning gospel legend who revolutionized modern Christian music, have both amassed devoted fan bases over the years. However, the confrontation between these two influential people in front of a live audience was more than just a startling event. The entire gospel community started talking about it. What transpired during that altercation, why Kirk Franklin felt obliged to speak up, and what it suggests about deeper problems inside the church and gospel industry are all covered in this film. You won't merely hear about the actual event. We'll explore the context, the unwritten history between these two leaders, and the fallout from this encounter. There is more to this story than a public dispute. It's about power, influence, and the fight to maintain accountability in areas where religion and celebrity collide. I promise you that the information we're going to reveal will make you reevaluate all you believe to be true about these two men. Follow me through to the conclusion, because we will disclose not only the events of the confrontation, but also the startling responses that followed. Responses that could alter the perceptions of Kirk Franklin and Bishop Noel Jones among supporters, adherents, and the gospel community at large. The evening was meant to be much like any other well-known church function. Thousands had arrived, some in their Sunday best, some in more relaxed clothes, but all were looking forward to hear passionate music, powerful sermons, and a worship atmosphere that could touch the hardest heart. The lights were perfectly dimmed, the stage was prepared, and gospel choirs sang melodies that filled the auditorium with enthusiasm. Two individuals with a huge presence were at the center of it all. Bishop Noel Jones, the senior pastor of City of Refuge in Los Angeles, is renowned for his captivating sermons and captivating personality, while Kirk Franklin is a gospel pioneer whose music has impacted millions of people worldwide. The crowd was already very interested in seeing both men together. Instead of the inspirational evening that they had anticipated, they received something unexpected. Everything appeared to be going according to plan as the celebration went on. Bishop Jones commanded attention with every word as he took the stage in his trademark fiery preaching manner, his voice booming through the speakers. He discussed accountability, leadership, and the importance of faith in helping individuals navigate the world's turbulence. Some audience members cheered, applauded, and even shed tears in response to his remarks. However, some attendees noted slight changes in the environment as he continued his sermon. Some remarks and tones appear to touch on delicate subjects, particularly for Kirk Franklin, who was occupying the first row. According to witnesses, Kirk, who is typically animated and talkative during church services, became notably quieter. His looks changed from one of courteous inquiry to one of tremendous intensity, as though each word were aimed directly at him. His eyes were tense, and others who were close enough could see him shaking his head and whispering to himself. He was offended by something in Bishop Jones's message, and it was only a question of time until that internal struggle would surface. The breaking point appeared to be Bishop Jones's particularly audacious remark, which many in the audience saw to be disparaging of the next generation of gospel leaders. It was more than a religious dispute. It went right to the core of what Kirk Franklin has fought for throughout his career: uplifting those who frequently feel marginalized by conventional church systems by making the gospel approachable, real, and accessible. Kirk Franklin was unable to remain seated at that point. Everybody in the building turned to watch him as he stood up, microphone in hand. A thick silence descended upon the room, one in which every heartbeat, breath, and shuffle could be heard. Individuals leaned forward in their seats, feeling that a momentous occasion was imminent. Then it took place. Nobody anticipated the conflict. However, what did Kirk say specifically? In front of thousands, how did Bishop Noel Jones react? The story becomes even more explosive at that point. As Kirk Franklin stood up, the electrifying atmosphere was nearly intolerable. Keep in mind that Kirk isn't your typical gospel performer. He has spent decades reinventing the global appeal of gospel music, making him a cultural legend. He is renowned for his vivacity, audacity, and reluctance to back down from difficult realities. Everyone in the auditorium understood at once that something significant was going to happen when he stood. Kirk Franklin's voice broke the stillness, microphone in hand. "With all due respect, Bishop," he said in a steady yet composed tone. The audience gasped as the speaker said, "I can't sit here and let this moment pass without speaking truth." They were not accustomed to witnessing such a public clash between two titans of the gospel world, and especially not during a live event that was being filmed and webcast. Each of Kirk's passionate statements sounded like a drum beat. He talked on how the very leaders who ought to be guiding and empowering the younger generation of Christians frequently make them feel ignored, disregarded, and even criticized. He emphasized to the crowd that gospel music is more than merely custom. It's about overcoming obstacles that separate people from God's love, reaching hearts, and mending scars. As his voice became louder, some in the audience started cheering and shouting, "Amen." "The church can't keep shutting its doors to the very people Jesus came to save," he said. Others sat motionless, divided between respect for Bishop Jones's authority and admiration for Kirk's audacity. The tension permeated every seat in the auditorium, giving the impression that the entire gospel community was witnessing a symbolic conflict between the new generation and the old guard. Known for his quick thinking and biting wit, Bishop Noel Jones didn't hold his silence for long. "Brother Kirk," he said, leaning into his microphone, his loud commanding voice echoing through the speakers. "When you wish to construct something new, you don't discard the foundation. You make it stronger." Kirk didn't back down, his hands making wild gestures as he fired back, highlighting his point. "Respectfully, Bishop, foundations are meant to hold up houses, not cages. We can't trap people in the past and expect them to thrive in the present." His words were strong, but his tone carried weight. At this point, the audience was no longer merely spectators, they were participants. And the auditorium became a flurry of applause, gasps, and shouts as half the room cheered for Kirk Franklin and the other half for Bishop Jones. Music and culture change, and if the church doesn't learn to change, it risks becoming irrelevant. This moment was even more shocking because it felt so raw, not a stage argument or scripted debate, but two men, both deeply convicted, standing firm on their beliefs in front of a live audience, and it was like watching history unfold in real time. A collision of philosophies that went far beyond music or ministry. Security personnel and event staff stood anxiously at the sides of the stage, uncertain if they might have to step in. But no one moved because the audience was too engrossed, too locked into this titanic battle. And in that authenticity, the confrontation carried even more weight. The tension became so intense that some people feared the event might completely collapse. You can't preach about saving souls while ignoring the cries of the next generation. If we lose them, Bishop, then all our preaching is in vain. Kirk Franklin's words, which hung in the air like a thunderclap, were the next statement that really set the room on fire. People knew they had just witnessed a moment that would be discussed for years to come. But the story doesn't end there. What happened right after Kirk's statement changed the entire dynamic of the evening and left the crowd even more divided. The silence that followed was deafening, a silence of stunned reflection rather than indifference. Even Bishop Noel Jones, who has been in ministry for decades and is the leader of one of the most powerful churches in America, seemed taken aback for a moment by Kirk Franklin's audacious statement as the room froze in that tense silence. Bishop Jones leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes narrowing, his jaw set in contemplation. When Bishop Jones finally spoke, his voice was both authoritative and abrasive. He had faced critics, skeptics, and challengers before, but this time it was different, not a journalist or a distant critic, but Kirk Franklin, a man adored by generations, standing toe-to-toe with him in front of an audience. Slowly and deliberately he replied, "Son, the church is not a place to try new things. God's home is there. Culture does not dictate to us." His remarks were met with resounding applause by the elder members of the audience, many of whom firmly nodded in gratitude that the bishop had resisted what they saw as young overreach. Culture bows to Christ. With all due respect, Bishop, culture may bow to Christ, but Christ also walked into culture. He ate with sinners, he touched lepers, he met people where they were. Kirk Franklin, however, was not going to be silenced. He leaned forward, his voice shaking with conviction. If the church refuses to meet people where they are, then we have lost sight of who Jesus truly is. The crowd erupted at that point, with young people, musicians, and proponents of the modern gospel jumping up and down on one side of the room, clapping, cheering, and shouting words of encouragement, while elders, church leaders, and traditionalists stood firmly on the other side, applauding Bishop Jones's call for order and respect. Witnesses later described the atmosphere as less like a church service and more like a courtroom, with each man presenting his case to the jury of public opinion as the auditorium split almost in half, like two armies rallying behind their generals, and the tension was so intense that it could be sliced with a knife. Brother Kirk, zeal without order leads to chaos. Bishop Jones, sensing the gravity of the situation, persisted, his voice growing sharper and more fiery. Cameras and phones were set high, recording every second, and within minutes, clips of the exchange started making the rounds online, sparking discussions far beyond the auditorium's four walls. His words, a defense of tradition and continuity, reverberated throughout the building. "If the standards don't speak to the people of today, then what are we handing down?" Kirk retorted, his tone growing urgent. "Bishop, if the standards don't speak to the people of today, then what are we handing down? Rules without relationship, religion without relevance, that's why people are leaving the church, Bishop." The statement struck like a lightning bolt, not because they don't love God, but because they don't feel the church loves them. Some people shook their heads in disapproval, while others gasped. The argument had progressed beyond music or preaching styles to become a full-fledged conflict over the church's future. As the crowd grew more divided, ushers attempted to defuse the situation by asking people to sit down. But the atmosphere was tense, and you could hear whispers, murmurs, and even heated arguments amongst attendees, some of whom were filming for social media, while others were already typing angry comments online to support their preferred viewpoint. Both men felt they were standing for truth, and neither was prepared to compromise. For Bishop Jones, this was not just about upholding tradition, it was about safeguarding the legacy of the church that had brought him up, mentored him, and influenced the lives of innumerable people. For Kirk Franklin, it was about safeguarding the next generation, ensuring they weren't turned off by antiquated practices or inflexible systems. As the crowd grew louder and the distinction between respect and chaos became more hazy, event organizers had to decide whether to step in and intervene or let history unfold. However, just when it appeared that the tension might explode into something unmanageable, Bishop Noel Jones made a move that fundamentally changed the course of the evening. The confrontation was no longer just about two men, it was about two visions of Christianity colliding in real time. One that startled the crowd once more. Bishop Noel Jones did something unexpected that caught everyone off guard. Rather than continuing to square up against Kirk Franklin, he paused, just when it appeared that the altercation may get out of hand. The entire auditorium gasped as Bishop Jones, in a dramatic and unexpected move, put his microphone down on the pulpit and stepped away, leaving his voice, body motionless, and eyes focused on the audience in a pause that lasted for several seconds. Long enough for people to begin whispering, uncertain of what was happening. "You see, this is exactly why we must talk." Bishop Jones sighed deeply as he walked slowly to the edge of the platform, closer to the audience, and then turned back toward Kirk Franklin. Some believed he was leaving the stage in rage, while others believed he was giving in to the argument. Not in whispers, not behind closed doors, but right here in public. Because Brother Kirk, What you're saying is the voice of a whole generation that is desperate to be heard. The weight of the generations that came before us, who laid the groundwork, is reflected in what I'm saying. Both are accurate, they're both heavy, and how can we carry them together is the question. The audience let forth a startled mutter. They had anticipated a fierce retort, but this was not it. This was a sign of weakness. This was a humble moment from a man who was thought to be unflappable. The tension in the room briefly changed from division to introspection. Kirk Franklin nodded slowly, clearly moved. His passion was still there, but his voice grew softer. That's all I've been requesting, Bishop. This generation only wants that. To participate in the construction process rather than to remove the foundation. To share our voices, challenges, and originality inside the church. So it's not just for a few people, but for everyone. Despite their continued division, the audience seemed to settle into a new intensity. While some crossed their arms in silent reflection, others cheered in agreement. However, the confrontation's intense intensity had now subsided into something stronger. Bishop Jones moved toward Kirk and held out his hand in an unusual gesture. The audience held its breath. Would Kirk agree? It appeared for a second that he may hesitate, but Kirk reached out and firmly grasped Bishop Jones's hand. The auditorium sprung into action. Applause, cheers, and even tears from several audience members. This handshake was more than simply a symbolic act for many. It was a declaration that harmony was achievable despite differences. That despite having strong opinions, two guys may still find common ground. Additionally, this became the most widely shared image among viewers on the internet. A potent reminder that the gospel world might still serve as an example of reconciliation in spite of its internal conflicts. This is where things become even more intriguing though. Not everyone left the gathering feeling satisfied, even if the handshake seemed to resolve the conflict. Indeed, the subsequent events generated additional discussions beyond the auditorium. While some thought Kirk Franklin had compromised by not pressing more, others thought Bishop Jones had softened too much by meeting Kirk halfway. Analysis, criticism, and hashtags exploded on social media. The moment was hailed as revolutionary by some supporters. It was rejected by others as performative. Event planners were relieved behind the scenes. They had barely prevented the program from collapsing completely. However, it was impossible to overlook the repercussions of that night in the weeks that followed. Christian media, gospel forums, and churches all had something to say. Who prevailed in the altercation was no longer the only question. It concerned the revelations made by the conflict regarding the condition of the contemporary church. And now for the unexpected turn of events. The handshake brought peace to the room, but it also sparked a whole new debate. One that would continue long after the lights went out that evening for both Bishop Noel Jones and Kirk Franklin. More than just a passionate argument between two titans of the gospel took place the night Kirk Franklin faced Bishop Noel Jones. It turned into a turning point, a mirror reflecting the more profound problems the church is currently confronting. Respect against relevance, authority versus authenticity, and tradition versus innovation. What started out as a disagreement evolved into a handshake, a symbolic act that demonstrated that disagreements could not separate people. But when the crowd went home and the lights went down, the debate continued. Debates that are still going strong were sparked by the aftermath that persisted in churches and online. Who was correct? Is it the gospel pioneer advocating for a more open and relevant church, or the experienced bishop defending the core tenets of the faith? Perhaps the true solution is found in striking a balance between respecting the past and looking to the future. There's no denying that this encounter created history. It served as a reminder that while the church isn't flawless, it is vibrant, dynamic, and constantly changing. And whether you agree with Bishop Noel Jones or Kirk Franklin, we can all learn from their bravery in speaking up in front of thousands of people. What do you think then? Did Kirk Franklin say something inappropriate, or was he just expressing what many people have been feeling for years? And did Bishop Jones make the right decision in his response, or did he lose the chance to be firm? Please share your opinions in the comments section below. Let's get the talk with each other.